An orphan girl came to the rescue of a millionaire following an accident. Upon awakening, he found that the girl adorned a ring inscribed with his wife's name. The rain pounded relentlessly on the towering glass windows of Samuel Martin's penthouse, creating a furious symphony, each drop breaking the silence he had meticulously maintained for years. The sleek interior, defined by crisp lines and subdued tones, mirrored his existence, void of warmth, meticulously arranged, and profoundly hollow. A chilly gust slipped through a partially open window, stirring the edge of a neglected photograph resting on the coffee table. In it, Rachel, his departed spouse, beamed beneath the gentle Texas sun, her curls dancing in the breeze, her eyes sparkling with vitality. Samuel cast a fleeting look at it, yet refrained from making contact. He never allowed himself to do so. Instead, he poured himself a neat whiskey and settled into the leather armchair by the window, gazing out at the rain-soaked cityscape of Houston. The skyline sparkled with illumination, yet it seemed as remote as the stars in the night sky. This evening signified yet another anniversary, a milestone he found too difficult to acknowledge. His chest constricted as the soft resonance of Rachel's voice lingered in his recollection. "You're more resilient than you realize, Sam." "Am I?" He whispered to the vacant space, his tone gravelly and subdued. The whiskey seared his throat, yet it failed to touch the pain hidden beneath. With keys in hand, Samuel resolved to break free from the oppressive confines of his penthouse. Driving had a way of clearing his thoughts, or at the very least, numbing them. He disregarded the umbrella as he ventured into the tempest, the frigid rain stinging against his skin. The sleek, black sports car sprang to life, cutting through the silence that had enveloped him. The roads glistened with rain, the streetlights creating ethereal reflections on the pavement. Samuel's hands clutched the wheel with an intensity that belied the calm of the night, his knuckles pale against the deep hue of the leather. The engine roared to life as he pressed down on the accelerator, the rain distorting the scenery beyond the windshield. The radio softly emitted an old jazz tune that Rachel once hummed along to. He turned the dial to switch it off, yet his fingers lingered, caught in a moment of indecision. The tune hung in the air, refusing to leave him, much like a persistent visitor. Unexpectedly, the memories surged forth. Rachel moved gracefully across the tiles, her laughter radiating warmth like the summer sun streaming through the windows. His throat constricted. He failed to notice the bend in the road until it was far too late. The vehicle careened uncontrollably, its tires howling against the slick road surface. Samuel's heart raced as he struggled with the steering wheel, but the vehicle swerved off the path, the surroundings spinning in a chaotic mix of rain and glaring headlights. The jarring sound of metal and glass colliding filled the air. A sharp pain shot through his side as the airbag detonated upon impact. The vehicle rolled over once before finally halting with a jarring thud at the base of a shallow ravine. Smoke spiraled from the hood, the sharp scent of gasoline heavy in the atmosphere. Samuel let out a low groan, his head throbbing painfully as he attempted to shift his position. The seatbelt pressed against his chest, securing him firmly in position. Crimson fluid seeped from his temple, warm and adhesive. Amidst the fog, a voice pierced through, youthful, crisp, and filled with urgency. "Hello there, sir, can you hear me?" He blinked, attempting to regain his concentration. A silhouette appeared through the downpour, diminutive yet agile, hastening towards the twisted debris. "Hold your position," the girl commanded, her tone slicing through his confusion. This situation could escalate at any moment. She moved on without waiting for his reply. With unexpected force for her stature, she tugged at the door, her fingers sliding over the slick metal. Frustration escaped her lips as she muttered under her breath, then she spotted a piece of debris and carefully wedged it against the frame. With determination, she steadied herself and exerted all her strength. The door creaked ajar. "Hurry up," she commanded, her piercing dark eyes evaluating him as she extended her hand. Samuel's breath caught in his throat as pain coursed through his ribs, yet the urgency in her voice drove him onward. She pulled him away, just as the flames danced at the edge of the hood. They tumbled as one, landing in the muck while the vehicle erupted in a fiery blaze behind them, a thunderous explosion shattering the silence. Samuel lost consciousness. Only darkness remained, accompanied by the haunting scream. Assistance needed. As Samuel opened his eyes, he found himself not beneath the sterile white of a hospital ceiling, but rather in a dreamlike haze of shadow and light. His body felt burdened, trapped beneath the oppressive force of fatigue and suffering. As his vision gradually sharpened, the initial sight that greeted him was her, a girl perched cross-legged in a well-loved chair by the window. She was just a child, perhaps around 10 or 11 years old. Her garments were worn thin, and her dark locks cascaded in irregular waves framing her face. She glanced up quickly, her deep eyes locking onto his, cautious and evaluating. "You're awake," she remarked, her tone calm yet cautious. He attempted to rise, but a sudden jolt of pain shot through his side, eliciting a sharp hiss from his lips. What transpired?" His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable to him. The young woman leaned in, her fingers clutching the armrest of her seat. "You crashed," she said, her tone sharp and precise. "The flames engulfed your vehicle. I rescued you before the situation escalated." The phrases lingered, their straightforwardness concealing the gravity of her actions. He observed her intently, a crease forming on his forehead. "You rescued me?" She dismissed it with a shrug, as if the topic held no value for conversation. It was inevitable. He cast a fleeting look beyond her, his gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. The tempest continued to howl beyond the walls, sporadic bursts of lightning casting a ghostly glow over the distant silhouette of the city skyline. The steady beep of the monitor pulled him back to the present, and his eyes finally focused on the IV. A needle affixed to his hand. "What is the reason behind this? Were you present?" he inquired, his tone measured and deliberate. Her lips formed a tight line as she leaned back in the chair, arms crossed defiantly. Inappropriate location, opportune moment. Her response was vague, and she avoided his gaze as she spoke. Samuel, despite his confusion, was aware of the art of deflection. This girl was not a benevolent bystander who stumbled upon the accident. Her narrative held deeper layers. His gaze wandered to the subtle shimmer of silver adorning her neck. What drew his gaze wasn't the necklace, but rather the ring that hung from it. A simple band engraved with a name. His throat constricted as he struggled to regain his breath. "Rachel Whitmore," he whispered. The girl's hand instinctively moved to her chest, fingers wrapping around the ring. Her gaze sharpened. "Could you repeat that?" Samuel's eyes narrowed with intensity. The inscription on the silver was unmistakable. Rachel's original surname. The identical name etched on the delicate keepsakes she had concealed from the world, from him, even during their closest encounters. "Where did you obtain that?" he inquired, his tone abruptly more resolute, slicing through the fog of his suffering. Her jaw clenched, and she gave a slight shake of her head. "It's mine," she declared, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "I've held on to it for as long as I can recall." Samuel elevated himself further against the pillows, disregarding the acute tug in his ribs. His gaze locked onto hers, thoughts swirling in a tempest. "That ring," he urged, his voice soft yet firm. "It could possibly be the name of my wife." For the first time, her carefully maintained facade faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. "Excuse me?" "Absolutely not, that's impossible." She faltered, clutching the ring more firmly as if that gesture could protect it from his accusation. Their eyes are fixed on each other, the tempest outside mirroring the charged atmosphere within the space. Samuel was at a loss for answers. A million questions gnawed at his thoughts, all revolving around the girl who had pulled him back from the brink of death, and the ring that was never meant to belong to her. Samuel rested against the hood of his car, the rain having dwindled to a gentle drizzle. The hospital wished to retain him, yet the demands of the company made that impossible. The girl, Sarah, as she introduced herself, stood a short distance away, arms crossed, her slender hoodie offering minimal protection against the chill in the air. She remained still, not a tremor in sight. She observed him with a keen, unwavering stare, a reflection of someone who had discovered the importance of skepticism at a young age. "Do you live nearby?" Samuel inquired, his tone calm yet inquisitive. Sarah responded with a shake of her head, her lips forming a tight line. "I move around." "That's vague," he replied, his tone neutral, lacking both accusation and warmth. "Where's your family?" She let out a quiet scoff, averting her gaze. "Vanished. Always have been." Samuel observed her intently, taking in the tautness of her posture. He noticed how her fingers played nervously with the ring on her necklace. "You're not from the streets, are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah paused, her demeanor shifting to one of resolve. "Why does it matter?" "It matters," Samuel replied, his calm demeanor countering her defiance. "You don't fit in here, and you were the one who saved me. I owe you something, at the very least. I didn't do it for any kind of reward." "I understand," he replied quietly. "But you can't possibly stay out here tonight. Join me for just one night. You can go in the morning if you prefer." Sarah frowned, clearly considering his offer. "Just one night?" "Just one," Samuel assured her. After a lengthy silence, she eventually nodded, her caution still apparent. "Fine. One night." Samuel opened the car door, and Sarah slipped in silently, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. The journey back to Samuel's mansion unfolded in quietude, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the engine and the soft patter of rain against the windows. Samuel maintained his concentration on the road ahead, his mind swirling with inquiries about the girl beside him in the passenger seat. Sarah sat rigidly, her knees pulled tightly together, the large hoodie draped over her still wet from the downpour. She averted his gaze, her fingers nervously toying with the chain that hung around her neck. The mansion emerged from the shadows, towering like a testament to opulence and solitude. The vast outline stood stark against the downpour, every window mirroring only the chill of the darkened evening. Samuel cast a fleeting look at Sarah, anticipating wonder or intrigue. Instead, her face revealed nothing, her steadfast expression remained resolute. "You will remain here for the night," he declared, his voice slicing through the stillness. "We'll sort everything out by morning." Sarah looked at him, a hint of suspicion dancing in her eyes. "I don't need charity," she muttered. "It's not charity," Samuel replied calmly, bringing the car to a halt. "You've saved my life. I owe you at least this much." The mansion sprawled before them, its interior bathed in a warm, golden light. With a cautious step, Sarah entered, the sound of her sneakers echoing softly on the gleaming marble floor. The air carried a subtle hint of lavender and wood polish, a clean aroma that only heightened the sense of separation she felt from this place. "Olivia!" Samuel called, his voice resonating in the vastness. Moments later, a middle-aged woman emerged, her dark hair meticulously pinned back and her uniform impeccably crisp. "This is Sarah," Samuel remarked, indicating the girl with a subtle wave of his hand. "She'll be staying here tonight." "Prepare one of the guest rooms," Olivia instructed, her gaze lingering on Sarah as her polite smile wavered for the briefest moment. "Of course, sir," she replied, turning to leave. Sarah watched her go, feeling a sense of unease. "You've got people working for you?" she inquired, her voice tinged with disbelief. Samuel gave a slight shrug. "The house doesn't run itself." He began his descent down the hallway, gesturing for her to come along. She paused for a moment, then followed, her sneakers leaving subtle impressions on the pristine floor. The room Samuel revealed to her was vast and pristine. In the center stood a canopy bed, adorned with crisp white linens that appeared unblemished. A window framed the garden outside, though the rain had turned the view into a haze of indistinct shapes. This should suffice, he remarked, lingering uncomfortably in the threshold. Sarah took her time to reply. She entered the room and traced her fingers along the surface of the dresser, creating delicate lines on the gleaming wood. Her gaze wandered to a small painting displayed above the bed, a gentle watercolor depicting a serene garden. "Is this your wife's?" she inquired, gesturing toward the painting. Samuel's demeanor became rigid. Indeed. She had a passion for painting. Sarah chose not to delve deeper, feeling the gravity in his voice. Instead, she glanced back at the bed, regarding it with caution. "It's too clean," she remarked with a straightforwardness that caught him off guard. Samuel let out a quiet chuckle, unable to help himself. "You'll acclimate to it," he replied, pausing for a moment before continuing, "Good night, Sarah." She remained silent until he was well down the corridor. "Good night," she murmured softly, as if the words were meant for her alone. The following morning, Sarah stirred awake to the inviting aroma of coffee mingling with a subtle hint of sweetness. She glided down the hallway, her bare feet whispering against the hardwood. The house appeared transformed in the daylight, less daunting yet still unfamiliar. In the kitchen, Samuel lingered by the stove, gently stirring something in a pan. He glanced up as she walked in, his face a mask of mystery. "Morning," he greeted, gesturing toward the counter. "There's food." Sarah took a seat at the island, surveying the array laid out before her. Scrambled eggs, toast, and jam, presented with a precision that felt almost excessive. She picked up a slice of toast and took small bites from the edge, her eyes wandering to the windows. The garden beyond was vibrant and untamed, droplets of rain adorning the blossoms as they sparkled in the sunlight. Sarah felt an irresistible pull towards it, the vibrant explosion of colors and textures standing in stark contrast to the pristine sophistication of the house. "She adored that garden," Samuel remarked, catching her gaze. "Your wife?" He nodded, his voice softer now. "Rachel, she spent hours out there, claiming it was the only place that felt alive in this house." Sarah looked at him, taken aback by his honesty. For a fleeting instant, she believed she glimpsed something unrefined in his gaze, a fissure in the sleek facade, but just as swiftly, it vanished. Later that day, the doorbell chimed, its sound reverberating through the grand mansion. Sarah observed from the staircase as Samuel opened the door, unveiling a woman with defined features and a tense, composed presence. "Gloria," Samuel said, moving aside to welcome her in. Her gaze locked onto Sarah, and for an instant, she stood still. The likeness was delicate yet undeniable, evident in the manner Sarah held herself, the angle of her head. "Who is this?" Gloria inquired, her tone measured yet sharp. "Sarah," Samuel answered succinctly. "She assisted me last night." Gloria's eyes remained fixed on the girl for a moment before drifting to the chain around her neck, her expression shifting as recognition sparked in her gaze. "That necklace," she murmured, her voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "Where did you get it?" Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the ring, her fingers wrapping around it as if to shield it. "It's mine," she replied, her tone laced with defensiveness. Samuel and Gloria shared a glance, the heaviness of unvoiced inquiries hanging in the air around them. The stillness in the room weighed down like a thick blanket, interrupted solely by the soft ticking of a grandfather clock echoing from down the hall. Gloria lingered by the window, her posture rigid, her hands firmly intertwined before her. Silence enveloped her since Sarah exited, the girl's subtle defiance hanging in the atmosphere like a distant whisper. Samuel filled 2 glasses with wine, placing one carefully on the table's edge closest to Gloria. "You recognized something," he stated, his voice calm yet insistent. "The necklace." The way he gazed at her. Gloria paused, her fingers fidgeting a bit as she turned to meet his eyes. "It's not a topic I ever wished to discuss," she murmured gently. "Gloria," Samuel said, his tone now more cutting. "What aren't you telling me?" Gloria inhaled deeply, the burden of her uncertainty weighing heavily on her shoulders. She grasped the glass of wine, yet refrained from sipping, clutching it as if it provided her with stability. Rachel had a child, she finally uttered, her voice quivering just a bit. Before she met you, the words lingered in the atmosphere, hitting Samuel like an unexpected breeze. He reclined in his chair, his face a mask of neutrality, yet the tightness in his jaw revealed the struggle to absorb her disclosure. "What are you trying to say?" he asked, his voice low and sharp. She was young, just fresh from college. It wasn't intended. The family concluded that maintaining silence was the wisest choice, considering her reputation. Gloria's gaze dropped to the ground, remorse etched in every feature of her expression. "I was unaware of the fate of the baby." Rachel never mentioned her again. Samuel's thoughts spun wildly, pieces of Rachel's existence that he believed were clear now lay fragmented and unclear. "And you didn't consider sharing this with me earlier?" he demanded, his voice elevating just a touch. Gloria recoiled slightly, yet held his gaze steady. "I believed it was hidden away." Rachel wished for it to remain hidden. She adored you, Samuel. And she was determined to protect the life you had created together. Sarah remained at the top of the staircase, hidden from view, her ears tuned to their exchange. While she couldn't discern every word, the strain in their voices was clear. She moved quietly down the hall, her sneakers barely making a sound on the plush carpet. The mansion's opulence now felt stifling, its immaculate surfaces mirroring only pieces of her essence. She drifted without purpose, her fingers gliding over the smooth, polished banisters and the intricate picture frames that adorned the walls. One frame captured her gaze, a photograph of a young woman, her dark curls flowing over her shoulders, her smile bright and sincere. Sarah lingered on the image, an unfamiliar feeling awakening in her chest. The woman's eyes appeared recognizable, though she couldn't quite determine why. She absently brushed her fingers across her face, her brow knitting in confusion. Meanwhile, Samuel paced the room below, his hands tangled in his hair as if he were attempting to extract clarity from the turmoil swirling in his thoughts. "It still doesn't clarify why Sarah possesses that ring. Why now? Why her?" Gloria shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't know, Samuel. But she resembled Rachel so much when she was younger. One cannot overlook that." Samuel's silence spoke volumes, his chest constricted, a tumult of anger, guilt, and an indescribable feeling gnawing at him. Rachel had borne this secret in solitude. How much of her had he truly known? Finally, he ceased his pacing and faced Gloria. "I'll find out," he declared, his voice resolute. "If there's even the slightest chance Sarah is linked to Rachel, I must know." The following morning, Samuel reached out to Peter, his reliable lawyer, who had guided him through the most challenging times. "Samuel," Peter greeted, his voice a blend of warmth and professionalism. "It's been some time. What's troubling you?" "I require your assistance," Samuel responded, his tone firm yet laden with urgency. "There's a girl here, a girl whose history seems inconsistent. And she could be linked to Rachel." Peter acted without a moment's pause. "Send me what you have, I'll take a look," he said. Samuel hesitated for a moment, casting a glance toward the stairs leading to Sarah's room. "Exercise caution, Peter. I prefer she remains uninvolved until we gather more information. Is that clear?" Peter acknowledged. "I'll begin right away." As Samuel concluded the call, he turned his gaze to the window, lost in thought. The garden sparkled under the morning sun, its flowers bright and full of life, yet to him it seemed like a mirror of bygone days, a beauty nurtured with love but now intertwined with shadows he couldn't escape. Upstairs, Sarah sat cross-legged on the bed, her fingers idly playing with the chain around her neck. She cast a glance toward the door, where the soft echo of Samuel's voice had just dissipated. Distrust lingered in her heart, not just for him but for everyone, yet there was a subtle spark of something elusive, a question, a connection, or maybe just the tiniest glimmer of hope. 2 days later, Peter's file arrived, thin yet laden with significance. Samuel opened it carefully at his desk, his gaze moving over the scant pages. The dates were inconsistent, names obscured, and the adoption agency's records were filled with omissions. Someone had meticulously unraveled the threads of Sarah's past, leaving only shards for him to assemble. Conflicting accounts, Peter had mentioned during their phone call that morning. Intentional, I believe. Someone was determined to keep her hidden, Sam. Samuel placed the file down, his fingers lingering on its worn edges. The mystery consumed him. What could drive someone to such extremes to obliterate a child's past? And why did that child now possess Rachel's ring? The gentle sound of sneakers on the floor broke his reverie. He glanced over to find Sarah framed in the doorway, her arms wrapped defensively around herself. "You've been quiet," he remarked, maintaining an even tone. Sarah merely shrugged, her gaze flickering toward the desk. "You're probing into my depths, aren't you?" Samuel didn't refute it. "I'm seeking to grasp your essence." She rested against the doorframe, her expression inscrutable. "What if I prefer to remain a mystery?" Later that afternoon, Sarah meandered through the garden. The rain from days past had yielded to a refreshing breeze, the aroma of damp soil blending with the subtle fragrance of late-blooming flowers. Rachel's garden, that's how Samuel had referred to it. The atmosphere buzzed with a vitality that the mansion lacked, wild and unrestrained even with the meticulously shaped hedges. Sarah knelt beside a cluster of marigolds, their vibrant orange petals standing out against the rich, dark earth. She extended her hand, gently caressing one with her fingertips. A sudden flash of recollection emerged, a tender hand leading hers as she nestled a seed into the soil. A woman's voice, soothing and kind. "Just like this. Do you see? The earth will handle the rest." Sarah's hand froze, her breath hitching in her throat. The memory was dim, ephemeral, like smoke eluding her grasp. Rachel cherished those moments. Samuel's voice cut through the fog. She glanced up to see him a short distance away, his hands tucked into his pockets. He compared them to the sun, his eyes lingering on the flowers. She often remarked how they brought her warmth, even in the bleakest moments. Sarah averted her gaze, the gravity of his words hanging thickly in the air between them. "Did you know her?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before she died." Samuel hesitated, taken aback by the question. "She was my wife," he said at last. Sarah remained silent, her face hardening again. Within the mansion, Olivia observed them from the kitchen window. Her hands diligently polished the silverware, yet her gaze was unwaveringly drawn to Samuel and Sarah in the garden. As her thoughts drifted, her movements became more languid. She observed the girl's cautious glances, the way she navigated the house like a fleeting shadow. Olivia had witnessed enough during her time with the Martins to recognize when someone was out of place. As Samuel stepped back into the kitchen, Olivia swiftly returned to her work, the cloth in her hands gliding purposefully over the fork she grasped. "Olivia," Samuel called as he entered, and she glanced up, her expression one of courteous detachment. "Yes, Mr. Martins," he paused. "What are your thoughts on her?" "Sarah," Olivia's hands froze. "She's young, reserved, appears to have endured quite a bit." Samuel nodded, his expression a mask of contemplation. "Keep an eye on her," he stated flatly, then exited the room. Olivia observed his departure, her jaw clenching in response. That night, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor of her room, the dim light of the bedside lamp casting long shadows on the walls. She fiddled with the chain around her neck, the cool metal of the ring pressing into her palm. Memories surged in flashes, fragmented and elusive. A gentle voice crooning a soothing melody, tender hands sweeping her hair from her face, the delicate aroma of lavender lingering in the air, yet each moment inevitably slipped into shadows. An unknown home, faces of strangers wearing strained smiles, a pervasive sense of being unwanted, cast aside. Sarah tightened her grip on the ring, her jaw firm with resolve. She had no use for them, neither Samuel nor this grand mansion, nor the incessant questions that trailed her like a persistent shadow. She had managed to endure on her own for this long. Yet, her eyes wandered to the garden beyond the window, illuminated by the soft glow of the moonlight. There was an intriguing quality in the way Samuel spoke of Rachel, a subtle reverence in his voice, and the way he regarded Sarah suggested he sought to understand her rather than to change her. Sarah dismissed the thought with a shake of her head. Trust was a luxury beyond her reach. Down the hall, Samuel sat in his study, the open file on Sarah spread before him. Although the puzzle pieces remained unfit, he sensed a subtle stirring of something more, a pull toward this girl who had unexpectedly entered his life and initiated a process he couldn't yet identify. Olivia passed by his study, pausing briefly to glance at the dim light spilling under the door. Her brow furrowed as she pressed forward, her thoughts swirling. She harbored secrets of her own, and Sarah's presence was already adding layers of complexity. Peter's second call arrived late in the evening, the sharp precision of his voice tinged with discomfort. "Sam, this isn't merely careless record-keeping. Someone meticulously erased her past. Adoption records, school files, they're either incomplete or altered, and it's intentional." Samuel tightened his grip on the phone, his frustration bubbling just below the surface. He walked back and forth in his study, the soft sound of rain outside heightening the unease in his heart. Why? Who could inflict such harm on a child? "That's what I'm trying to uncover," Peter responded, "but the perpetrator was meticulous. I require more time." Time. It was the one thing Samuel sensed he lacked. Sarah wandered through the garden once more the next day, her movements slower, her steps more cautious. Samuel observed her from the balcony, his coffee sitting untouched on the wrought iron table beside him. She knelt by the marigolds, her fingers brushing the soil, as if on a quest for something concealed within its depths. He couldn't help but see Rachel in her, a likeness that transcended mere appearance. There was a subtle resolve in the way she held herself, an unvoiced defiance that echoed Rachel's essence. "Mr. Martins," Olivia's voice interrupted his reverie. She lingered in the doorway, her hands clasped neatly in front of her apron. "Will you be needing anything else today?" Samuel shook his head, keeping his gaze averted from her. "No, that'll be all." Olivia lingered for a moment longer than necessary, her gaze darting towards Sarah before she retreated into the shadows of the house. That night, the atmosphere in the mansion felt denser. Samuel sat in his study, gazing at the disarray of Peter's findings. The incomplete adoption records were particularly concerning, the dates were inconsistent, and the agency's name had been obscured in multiple instances. As he set the papers aside and raked a hand through his hair, his irritation surged. Is Sarah Rachel's daughter? And why had she appeared before him now, of all moments? A subtle creak outside his door caught his attention. Samuel rose, his movements quick yet quiet, as he opened the door. The hallway lay empty, but a delicate hint of lavender hung in the air. Sarah lay awake in her room, her fingers tracing the edges of the ring. The memories that had surfaced earlier in the garden haunted her now, half-formed images that felt more like dreams than reality. She recalled a woman's laughter, soft and melodic, mingling with the scent of flowers, yet the face remained blurred, her voice drowned by the sound of slamming doors and hurried footsteps, her grip on the ring tightening. Whoever the woman had been, she was long gone, and Sarah had learned long ago that those who departed rarely returned. Samuel's frustration shifted to unease the following morning when Peter called once more. "There's something else," Peter said, his tone cautious. "Calls have been coming in from private numbers, each one silent, leaving no messages. This all began immediately after I accessed the records." Samuel's jaw tightened in response. "Do you believe we might be under observation?" "It's a possibility. Stay alert, Sam. If this girl's background is linked to something more significant, we could be delving into more than just her history." Samuel ended the call, his thoughts swirling. He looked over to the kitchen, where Olivia was softly humming while making breakfast. Her movements were deliberate, her face serene, yet there was an unsettling quality about her. Comment, sausage, if you're tuned into this segment of the tale. Perfect fare for our breakfast, wouldn't you agree? Now, let's press on with today's narrative. Later that day, as he walked by the laundry room, he caught sight of her quickly stuffing something into her apron pocket. Their eyes locked for a fleeting moment, and she gave a constrained smile before quickly retreating. Samuel chose not to address her right away, yet the whisper of doubt had taken root. Later that evening, Sarah perched on the balcony, her legs swinging freely over the edge. The cool breeze wafted the delicate fragrance of marigolds, yet it did little to alleviate the tightness in her chest. Samuel approached, drawing up a chair while maintaining a respectful space. "You've been quiet," he remarked. Sarah cast a look his way, her face a mask of mystery. "You have too." He acknowledged with a nod, his eyes wandering toward the horizon, while Peter continued to scrutinize your records. "It could require a bit of patience. Why is it so significant to you?" she inquired, her tone pointed yet gentle. Samuel paused, selecting his words with caution. "Because I believe you have a link to someone I cherished deeply, someone who was my entire world." Sarah remained silent, her grip on the balcony's edge growing tighter. "You don't need to place your trust in me," Samuel pressed on, his tone gentle yet resolute. "Yet, I refuse to abandon my quest for the truth. Not regarding you, nor concerning Rachel." Sarah gazed out at the garden, her jaw clenched. She yearned to place her faith in him, yet trust was a perilous gamble, one she couldn't risk. In the dim corners of the mansion, Olivia made a discreet phone call, her voice low but filled with urgency. "He's probing," she murmured, her gaze flickering toward the study where Samuel's light continued to glow. "And the girl, she holds secrets beneath her calm exterior." A low voice responded from the other end, the words muffled yet laced with an unsettling threat. Olivia's hand shook as she concluded the call, slipping the phone back into her pocket. She cast a quick look down the hallway, her face etched with concern. The morning unfolded like any typical day. Samuel departed early for work, his thoughts consumed by Peter's discoveries and the growing uncertainties regarding Sarah. The rain had at last subsided, revealing a sky bathed in soft sunlight. Sarah lingered in the garden, her familiar sanctuary, her fingers gliding over the petals of marigolds and violets. Yet, beneath the serene surface, her instincts were on high alert. Having spent considerable time on the streets, she had developed an instinct for sensing when things were amiss. Within the mansion, Olivia navigated with her characteristic precision, yet an undercurrent of anxious energy marked her presence. Her eyes flitted toward the windows, shifting between Sarah and the lengthy driveway that approached the house. By mid-afternoon, the facade of tranquility crumbled. Sarah had merely returned to the kitchen for a glass of water when a powerful hand covered her mouth, silencing her scream. Her heart pounded as she struggled and resisted, but Joe Montenegro's hold was relentless. "Be quiet," he snarled, pulling her toward the back door. His actions were quick and deliberate, each stride revealing his skill. Sarah fought back, kicking and writhing, and in her struggle, she sent a vase tumbling to the ground. The noise reverberated through the vacant corridors. Olivia emerged in the doorway, her complexion ashen, yet she remained still, not attempting to intervene. "Are you simply going to linger there?" Sarah's voice, muffled, pierced through the turmoil. Olivia averted her gaze, her hands quivering. "I'm sorry," she murmured. Joe's lips curled into a smirk. "Good girl," he muttered, pulling Sarah outside. Samuel was in the midst of a board meeting when his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Noticing Olivia's name, he stepped into the corridor, irritation bubbling just beneath his composed facade. "Olivia, I told you they took her." Olivia's voice was frantic, quivering with dread. Samuel felt a chill wash over him. "What? Who took Sarah?" "There was nothing I could do," Olivia stammered. They were armed. Stay there, Samuel barked, interrupting her. Don't touch anything. I'm returning. He ended the call, his heart racing as he called Peter. Peter, Sarah's been taken, he stated, his voice calm even as turmoil swirled within him. I require your presence at the house immediately. When Samuel reached the mansion, it was teeming with security personnel and Peter's crew. Shattered glass was scattered across the kitchen floor, and a subtle aroma of disturbed earth from the garden lingered in the atmosphere. Peter stepped closer, his demeanor serious. We discovered this in Olivia's room, he stated, presenting a folder filled with bank statements and a burner phone. Samuel examined the papers, his jaw clenching in response. Numerous substantial deposits, all occurring in the last month, connected Olivia unmistakably to Vincent Gonzalez. She assisted them, Samuel remarked, his tone subdued yet brimming with barely contained anger. Peter acknowledged with a nod. We have her in the study, and she's not denying it. Olivia sat there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The usual composure she exuded had crumbled, giving way to an overwhelming sense of fear and guilt. Samuel stepped inside, his aura commanding the space. Why? He questioned, his tone icy. Olivia recoiled. I had no choice, she whispered. Vincent, he was aware of my debts, and he threatened my family. Samuel's fists tightened at his sides. So you betrayed a child, someone I was responsible for. Tears flowed down Olivia's cheeks. I believed they only intended to frighten her. I had no idea they would. Enough, Samuel interrupted, his tone slicing through her justifications. He glanced at Peter. Contact the authorities. This situation is over. Olivia wept as Peter moved closer, his face a mask of uncertainty. You must share it all, he insisted with conviction. Who you communicated with, how they reached out to you, every detail. Hours later, Samuel found himself amidst the chaos of the kitchen, the broken vase resting in its place of demise. Peter walked over, phone in hand. We have a lead, he announced. Joe Montenegro, a member of Vincent's crew, has been spotted in the vicinity. Samuel nodded, his demeanor growing more resolute. Then we locate him, and we reclaim her. Peter paused. Samuel, you need to brace yourself. Vincent always sees things through to the end. If Sarah has any insight, she doesn't, Samuel cut in. She's merely a child. Peter remained silent, yet the unsaid options lingered in the air around them. Meanwhile, in a shadowy warehouse far off, Sarah was tied to a chair, her wrists sore from the restraints. Joe walked back and forth in front of her, his self-satisfied smile highlighted by the dim light of a flickering bulb above. You've certainly stirred the pot, haven't you, little girl, he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. You must be quite remarkable. Sarah shot him a fierce look, her defiance unwavering even as fear coiled within her. You don't scare me, Joe chuckled, leaning in closer. Oh, you should be scared, because the man I work for, he doesn't tolerate loose ends. Sarah's heart raced, yet she was determined not to reveal her fear to him. Instead, she concentrated on the ring resting against her neck, its metal cool against her skin. If Samuel had truly valued her enough to welcome her into his home, perhaps, just perhaps, he would care enough to seek her out. And she was determined not to surrender without a struggle. Samuel lingered by the broken kitchen window, gazing at the shards of glass glinting in the morning light. His hands tightened into fists as Olivia's quivering admission echoed in his thoughts. The sense of betrayal hurt, yet the worry for Sarah overshadowed everything else. Each second that Sarah spent in Vincent Gonzalez's grasp felt perilous. Peter walked in, his phone glued to his ear. We've got confirmation, he said, his tone strained. Joe Montenegro has been seen at a warehouse on the outskirts of Houston. It aligns with Vincent's strategy. Secluded, manageable. Samuel pivoted abruptly, determination etched on his face. We're leaving now. Hold on, Peter interjected, raising a hand. We must approach this with caution. Vincent is likely to have eyes on us, and he may even have a backup strategy in place. We must carefully consider this. Samuel's gaze eased just a bit. Now, act quickly, Peter. Every minute slips away. He struggled to complete the thought. The study transformed into their improvised command center. Peter's team laid out maps and surveillance photos of the warehouse, highlighting entry points and possible escape routes. Joe will have at least 2 men with him, possibly more, Peter explained, gesturing to the blueprints. The warehouse is expansive, with 2 levels and numerous rooms. We must act swiftly and silently. Samuel hardly paid attention, his mind wandering to Sarah. He recalled her shy smiles when she believed no one was watching. The way her fingers danced over Rachel's marigolds in the garden. She had rescued him without a second thought. And now, she required his help. Samuel, Peter said with a cutting edge, yanking him back to reality. You're staying in the car. The hell I am, Samuel retorted, his voice laced with defiance. Hear me out, Peter said, his voice steady yet composed. You're feeling a lot right now. And Vincent's men will exploit that. If anything goes awry, it's crucial for you to maintain your composure. Allow my team and me to take charge of the situation. Samuel fixed his gaze on him, a smoldering anger lurking beneath the surface. Yet, he understood that Peter had a point. Allowing his feelings to dominate could jeopardize Sarah's safety. Very well, he conceded with a hint of reluctance. However, if you don't retrieve her in the next 10 minutes, I'm taking action. Peter acknowledged with a nod. That seems reasonable. The journey to the warehouse was eerily silent. The sun started its descent, stretching shadows across the industrial fringes of Houston. Samuel's grip on the steering wheel was tense, his knuckles pale against the dark leather. His jaw tightened as he struggled to maintain control over his rising fear. Peter sat next to him, reviewing the plan with his team for the final time. Joe is impulsive, he remarked. He may attempt to instill fear in us. Perhaps he'll try to stall. We must not allow that to happen. Retrieve Sarah and leave. Samuel remained silent. His thoughts drifted, envisioning Sarah isolated and terrified, her keen intelligence and courage enduring the harshness of men like Joe and Vincent. They arrived just as night descended. The warehouse towered in the shadows, its windows flickering with a soft yellow glow. Peter's team dispersed, advancing with a familiar grace as they neared the structure. Samuel remained in the car, his gaze locked onto the warehouse. Every fiber of his being was taut, ready for movement. He glanced at his watch, each tick heightening the pressure in his chest. Inside, Sarah remained in the same chair, her wrists still restrained, her body weary from hours of immobility. Joe reclined nearby, a self-satisfied grin on his face as he flicked through his phone. You're silent now, he taunted. Not so tough anymore, are you? Sarah shot him a fierce look. You really do talk too much. Joe's smile wavered, and he rose, leaning in closer. Be cautious, young one. You have no clue who you're dealing with. The echo of boots on concrete cut through the moment. Joe pivoted quickly as Peter's crew stormed into the room, weapons drawn. Hands up, Montenegro, one of them shouted. Joe grinned, lifting his hands with deliberate slowness. Took you long enough, Peter demanded, stepping forward. Joe gestured lazily toward Sarah, who watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. Conflicting emotions played across her face, a mix of relief and fear. Go on, Joe taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. Take her. Yet, it's clear this is far from over. Peter turned a deaf ear to him, gesturing for one of his men to release Sarah. She flinched as the binding slipped off, her wrists marked and sore. You all right? Peter inquired, kneeling next to her. Sarah gave a slight nod, her voice barely above a whisper. I believe so. Outside, Samuel noticed the signal, a brief flicker of a flashlight from Peter's team. He leaped from the car, heart racing as he sprinted toward the warehouse. Sarah emerged into the cool night air, her body shaking as she caught sight of him. "Samuel," she whispered. He stepped closer, his hands gently resting on her shoulders for a moment before enveloping her in a warm, protective embrace. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice heavy with emotion. Peter approached, his expression somber. "Joe delivered a message," he said. "Vincent is aware that we are on his trail. This is just the beginning." Samuel gripped Sarah firmly, his jaw clenched. "Let him try, he won't have her again." Sarah gazed up at him, her eyes shimmering with unfallen tears. For the first time, she allowed herself to trust his sincerity. Within the shadowy warehouse, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Joe Montenegro, still held captive by Peter's men, leaned against a pillar, his face marked by bruises yet radiating defiance. A mocking grin lingered as he spat blood onto the concrete floor. "You think you've won?" Joe sneered, his voice laced with contempt. "Unbeknownst to you, a storm is brewing." Peter's gaze sharpened. "We shall embrace our fate." He gestured for his men to apprehend Joe, their actions quick and precise. At the same time, Sarah held tightly to Samuel, her petite figure shaking even as she tried to project courage. The night breeze brought with it the subtle odor of oil and rust, a stark reminder of the trials she had faced. "You didn't have to come," Sarah muttered, her voice barely a whisper. Samuel crouched down to meet her gaze, his expression a blend of guilt and resolve. "Yes, I did," he replied with conviction, "and I always will." As they made their way back to the mansion, an oppressive silence enveloped the car, punctuated only by Sarah's occasional wince as she shifted her sore wrists. Samuel stole a glance at her in the rearview mirror, his heart aching at the sight of her weariness. Upon arriving at the house, Peter's team remained behind to complete the debriefing with the authorities. Sarah trailed behind Samuel, her steps uncertain. The mansion, once a place of confinement, now exuded an unexpected warmth and security. "You need to rest," Samuel said softly as they stepped into the living room. "I'll have Olivia," he paused, a realization dawning on him. Olivia was no longer in their lives. "I'll prepare your room," he amended, but Sarah simply shook her head. "I don't want to be alone," she confessed softly. For a brief moment, Samuel found himself at a loss for words. He gestured toward the couch. "Then sit here, I'll remain." Peter came back an hour later, his face serious yet resolute. He placed a hefty file onto the coffee table, the papers cascading out in a disordered mix of photographs and documents. "Joe is in trouble," Peter remarked, settling into a chair. "It's not us he's scared of, it's Vincent that has him on edge. He validated everything." Samuel leaned forward, his jaw clenched. "Everything?" "Vincent had planned it all," Peter went on. "Sarah's entry into your life was no coincidence. Vincent was aware of Rachel's history, including her child. He aimed to unsettle you. Sarah served as the ideal instrument for his plans." Sarah stood still, her breath hitching in her throat. "Pawn." Peter's tone became gentler. "Vincent intended to manipulate you to inflict pain on Samuel. That's why Joe orchestrated your abduction, a tactic to lure him out." Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears, but she swiftly blinked them back, her jaw set with determination. "I'm not a pawn in anyone's game," she declared boldly. Samuel's voice resonated with a quiet strength. "No, you're not." He shifted his gaze to Peter and Vincent. Peter paused, uncertainty creeping in. Joe's account provided sufficient grounds for a warrant. "For the time being, Vincent has been apprehended. For now." Peter let out a heavy sigh. Men like Vincent rarely remain confined for too long. He'll get his legal team ready, and if he discovers a weakness in the system, he'll pursue you and Sarah once more. Samuel stood, moving restlessly around the room. The anger and frustration bubbling under his composed surface were almost overwhelming. At last, he faced Peter. "Then we ensure he won't." That evening, Sarah was nestled on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Samuel sat across from her, his hands tightly clasped. "Why did you come for me?" Sarah asked suddenly, shattering the silence. Her voice was soft, filled with doubt. Samuel's expression softened. "You matter," he said simply. She frowned, her fingers twisting in the fabric of the blanket. "You don't truly understand me." Samuel leaned in, his eyes unwavering. "I know enough. I recognize your courage. I see your strength. And I would go to any lengths to keep you safe." Sarah remained silent, yet the barriers she had meticulously constructed over the years started to fracture. Her gaze fell upon the ring dangling from her neck, its weight inexplicably diminishing. In that moment, she allowed herself to entertain the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, she was no longer solitary. The phone vibrated softly on the table, shattering the delicate silence. Peter grasped it, his face a mask of inscrutability as he absorbed the words from the caller. Moments later, he ended the call and faced Samuel. "Vincent is currently in custody, as he mentioned. The police are detaining him for further questioning. Joe's statement has provided us with some breathing room, but we must remain vigilant." Samuel nodded, his jaw tightening with resolve. "Then we prepare for whatever comes next." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes unwavering even in the face of fatigue. "I'm not afraid of him," she said softly. Samuel met her gaze, his expression brimming with a quiet resolve. "You won't have to be." As the night unfolded, the mansion embraced a profound stillness. Yet, this stillness was not one of desolation or dread. It was the stillness of a conflict resolved and victory claimed. For now. The fluorescent lights of the police station hummed softly above, illuminating the stark, tiled floor with a relentless brightness. Samuel's footsteps reverberated through the corridor as he trailed an officer toward the holding area. His expression remained composed, yet the tension in his jaw revealed the turmoil brewing just below the surface. "Here he is," the officer announced, halting outside a modest gray-walled interrogation room. Through the one-way glass, Vincent Gonzalez was seated at the steel table, his hands loosely cuffed in front of him. He appeared to be right at home, his tailored suit slightly wrinkled yet still striking, his hair meticulously styled, and his smirk unyielding. Samuel tightened his fists. "Get out." The officer paused. "Sir," Samuel pivoted, his gaze intense. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I require." With a hesitant nod, the officer stepped aside, granting Samuel entry into the room. Vincent glanced up as the door clicked shut behind Samuel, his smirk growing. "Ah, Samuel Martins, perpetually unruffled, even as chaos swirls around you." Samuel remained on his feet, positioned firmly across the table, his eyes locked onto Vincent. "You've crossed the line, Vincent." Vincent reclined in his chair, the soft sound of his cuffs gently tapping against the table. "Too far." "Oh, Sam, this is merely the start, though I must admit, your response was worth every bit of effort." Samuel's voice was as cold as ice. "You exploited her. A mere child. You manipulated her suffering for your own revenge." Vincent let out a low, bitter chuckle. "She was just a means to an end, a reminder that no one remains at the pinnacle indefinitely, particularly not a man who had wronged me." Samuel's gaze sharpened. "I took nothing from you." Vincent's face grew stern. "Rachel did, and don't even think about pretending you were unaware." Samuel stood still, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" Vincent leaned in closer, a sinister glint in his eyes. "Your beloved Rachel wasn't as innocent as you believed. She was determined to protect her secrets, so determined, in fact, that she did precisely what I requested, took confidential documents from your company and delivered them to me." Samuel's fists tightened at his sides. "You're not telling the truth." "Am I?" Vincent's grin reappeared, more pointed this time. "Consider this. Why was she in that car the night she perished? What led her to take that road, alone, in the dead of night, with a folder of papers that mysteriously vanished after her accident?" Samuel sensed the ground shift beneath him, the atmosphere in the room thickening. He had always held himself accountable for that evening, for the files left in his car, for his lack of caution. But now, she was left with no choice, Vincent went on, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I presented her with two alternatives, destroy you, or allow the world to uncover her secret, the daughter she chose to leave behind." Samuel's breath hitched, the fragments of the mystery aligning perfectly. Rachel's remorse, her bouts of unaccountable sorrow, her hesitance to share her history, it all became clear in that moment. "You took her life," Samuel uttered, his tone dark and menacing. Vincent extended his hands, the chains rattling once more. "I didn't touch her. She chose her path, just as you are choosing yours at this moment." Samuel moved in, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "And, Sarah, you pulled her into this to wound me, to shatter the fragile peace I had remaining." Vincent chuckled quietly. "She was never meant to hold significance for you. Just a loose thread, a catalyst for chaos. Yet you transformed her into something vital. Sam, you deftly took advantage of the moment. And now, here we find ourselves." Samuel leaned over the table, his voice a low growl. "This stops now. You will not lay a finger on her again, nor will you approach my family. Do you comprehend?" Vincent's smirk diminished a bit, his gaze sharpening. "Do you really believe that confining me will resolve your issues? You've witnessed my abilities firsthand. Do you assume I lack support beyond these walls? There are those prepared to carry on with my mission." Samuel stood tall, his eyes unwavering. "Let them try." As Samuel emerged from the interrogation room, his heart raced with a blend of fury and insight. The truth regarding Rachel felt like a burdensome load, yet it also sparked a relentless resolve within him. Regardless of the errors she had committed, her actions stemmed from a place of love and urgency. And Sarah, she was not merely a piece in Vincent's strategy. She was intertwined with Rachel, a member of his family now. Peter stood in the corridor, anticipation etched on his face. "How did it go?" he asked. Samuel let out a slow breath, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "He won't stop, not unless we ensure he has no means of returning." Peter nodded with a serious expression. "We will enhance security measures, and I will continue to urge the authorities to detain him. With Joe's testimony and the evidence we've collected, we may be able to keep him incarcerated long enough to take down his operation." Samuel cast a sharp look over his shoulder at the interrogation room, determination etched on his face. "Whatever it takes. He will ensure Sarah is never harmed again." As he stepped out of the station, the night air wrapped around him, cool and dense. Samuel sensed a flicker of determination. This was not the end, but he was certain of one thing. He refused to allow Vincent, or anyone for that matter, to ruin what little remained. Sarah was entitled to more than a life filled with fear and deceit. He was determined to provide her with that, regardless of the sacrifices required. The envelope rested silently on Samuel's desk, its edges crisp and unblemished, yet it seemed to carry an immense weight. Within it lay the answer he both feared and yearned for, the outcome of the DNA test that had the potential to alter his life. Samuel reclined in his chair, gazing at the ceiling as Rachel's image floated through his thoughts. Her laughter, her smile, the silent weight she had borne. Now, with Vincent's words resonating in his mind, he couldn't shake the thought that the young girl before him was more than just a stranger, she might be Rachel's daughter. He paused, his hands quivering slightly, before ultimately ripping the envelope open. Sarah sat curled on the couch in the living room, the blanket she'd claimed during her first night still draped over her shoulders. She fiddled with the ring around her neck, her thoughts a swirling blend of confusion and exhaustion. The days since the rescue had felt utterly surreal. Samuel had been observant yet reserved, his mind appearing to drift. While she valued his concern, an insistent whisper in her thoughts held her defenses high. What if he doesn't truly want me here after everything? She murmured softly, her grip tightening on the ring. Her musings were abruptly halted by the echo of Samuel's footsteps. He lingered in the doorway, an opened envelope grasped in his hand. For a brief moment, silence enveloped them, his expression inscrutable. "Sarah," he said at last, his voice soft yet firm. She glanced up, her heart pounding at the gravity of his tone. "What is it?" Samuel entered the room and took a seat opposite her, laying the papers on the table that separated them. "I had a DNA test done," he admitted. Sarah's breath caught, her defenses shooting up immediately. "You what?" "I needed to know," he said gently, meeting her startled gaze. "For the two of us." She leaned back, her fingers gripping the blanket tightly. "And?" Samuel extended his hand across the table, resting it on the papers. "You're Rachel's daughter." The statement lingered, thick and undeniable. Sarah stood still, her eyes widening as she grappled with the weight of his revelation. "Are you certain?" she murmured. He nodded, his voice heavy with feeling. "I am certain." For a long moment, silence enveloped them. Then Sarah exhaled unsteadily, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She was truly my mother. "Indeed," Samuel spoke gently, "and I cannot express how significant that is to me." The subsequent days unfolded as a blend of recovery and fresh starts. With the truth finally revealed, Sarah experienced an unusual, tentative sense of relief. She dedicated countless hours to the garden, nurturing Rachel's marigolds and discovering the hidden nooks of the estate she had previously shunned. Samuel frequently accompanied her, his presence a calm and unwavering support. He recounted tales of Rachel, highlighting her passion for art, her resolute spirit, and her tender compassion. With every tale, Sarah sensed a profound bond with the woman she had never fully understood. Yet now, she realized she had cherished her in her own unique manner. One afternoon, as Sarah knelt beside the marigolds, Samuel came near, holding a small box in his hands. "I discovered this among Rachel's belongings," he remarked, extending it towards her. Sarah carefully unwrapped it, uncovering a fragile bracelet crafted from minute silver links, with a subtle inscription on the clasp that read, "For my sunshine." "She intended to give it to you," Samuel added, "before everything changed." Sarah's fingers glided over the inscription, a wave of emotion washing over her. She fastened the bracelet around her wrist, its cool weight serving as a physical link to the mother she had never met. "Thank you," she murmured softly. As the days morphed into weeks, Sarah started to establish her place within the mansion. It ceased to be a realm of strangeness or fear. Her bond with Samuel grew stronger as they journeyed through their new roles side by side. He approached her with unwavering patience and gentle care, never rushing her, but consistently providing a calming presence. In response, Sarah slowly dismantled her defenses and started to place her trust in him. One evening, while they sat on the balcony with a view of the garden, Sarah finally spoke up, shattering the serene silence that enveloped them. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" she asked, her voice soft yet distinct. Samuel faced her, his demeanor tender. "I don't think she'd be proud, Sarah. She would be, I know it." A faint smile graced her lips as she leaned back in the chair. For the first time in what felt like ages, the future seemed less daunting. Later that night, Samuel found himself in Rachel's garden, the stars twinkling vividly overhead. He sensed the heaviness of her absence, yet for the first time, it felt manageable. "I wish you could see her," he whispered, his voice soft and barely heard. "She's incredible, Rachel, just like you." As he turned to go back inside, a soft breeze rustled the marigolds, their petals dancing lightly in the moonlight. It felt as though Rachel was there, observing, her essence intertwined with the life they were starting to create together. Samuel smiled to himself, the ache in his heart softened by a quiet, steady hope. The sun filtered gently through the sheer curtains in the study as he signed the final document. The significance of the moment was deep, yet his hand remained steady. Across the table, Sarah sat quietly, her small fingers gripping the bracelet Rachel had meant for her. Despite her efforts to conceal it, her nervous energy was unmistakable. "It's official," the attorney stated, sliding the documents into a tidy folder. "Congratulations, Mr. Martins." Samuel looked at Sarah, his demeanor a blend of warmth and gravity. "Sarah," he said softly, "you are now, in every way, my daughter." Her eyes grew wide, and for a brief moment, silence enveloped her. As the weight of the words settled in, her lips quivered, and she fought to hold back tears. "You truly mean it." Samuel shifted closer, kneeling to meet her gaze. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," he declared. Sarah enveloped him in a warm embrace, pressing her face into his shoulder. For the first time, the vulnerability she had fought so fiercely to conceal poured forth. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice soft yet sincere. Samuel embraced her closely, his own feelings on the verge of consuming him. "No, Sarah, thank you." Later that afternoon, Gloria arrived at the mansion, cradling a bouquet of lilies. She paused at the door, her heart weighed down by memories of Rachel, but when Sarah opened it, her demeanor softened. "Gloria," Sarah said, her voice hesitant yet more assured than it had been, stepped inside and placed the flowers on a nearby table. "I wanted to see you," she said, "and to apologize." Sarah tilted her head, puzzled. "For what?" "For my ignorance," Gloria said, her voice heavy with feeling. "For not being present for you earlier. I see so much of Rachel in you, and I want you to understand. Your family, indeed." Sarah regarded her for a brief moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she replied, with sincerity. Gloria smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes, as she gently reached out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind Sarah's ear. "You remind me so much of her," she murmured. That evening, Samuel and Sarah stood together in the garden, spades clutched firmly in their hands. A small patch of freshly turned earth lay before them, eagerly anticipating the seeds that Sarah cradled in her palm. "What are we planting?" Samuel inquired, kneeling beside her. "Daisies," Sarah answered. "They're straightforward yet, they're filled with hope." Samuel nodded, observing her as she meticulously pressed the seeds into the earth. "Hopeful sounds, perfect," he remarked. As they toiled, the serene ambience of the garden was enriched by the gentle melodies of birds preparing for dusk, accompanied by the subtle whisper of leaves dancing in the wind. The garden, previously a sanctuary of reflection and nostalgia, now pulsed with the anticipation of fresh beginnings. Once the final seed was nestled into the earth, Sarah settled back on her heels, brushing her hands against her jeans. "Do you think she'd like it?" she asked, glancing at Samuel. "She'd love it," he replied, without hesitation. This garden was her favorite place, and now it's ours. Sarah smiled, a gentle warmth enveloping her. For the first time, she sensed a connection to something greater, a family, a legacy, a place to belong. Within the mansion, the rooms were filled with a newfound vibrancy. Sarah's laughter echoed through the corridors as she playfully ribbed Samuel about his haphazard gardening efforts. Gloria's visits grew more regular, infusing the atmosphere with warmth and tales of Rachel that filled the void her absence had created. Meanwhile, Samuel, who had once been enveloped in solitude, discovered a newfound embrace of a role he had never anticipated, a father. On a crisp spring morning, Samuel and Sarah found themselves on the balcony, gazing at the vibrant garden beneath. The marigolds that Rachel had adored shone brilliantly in the sunlight, while the first daisies Sarah had sown timidly emerged from the earth. "Do you think things will ever return to normal?" Sarah inquired, resting against the railing. Samuel smiled. I can't say what normal is, he confessed, but I believe we're creating something far beyond that. We're crafting a future. Sarah nodded, a subtle smile gracing her lips. That sounds delightful. As they lingered in the moment, the gentle breeze wafted the fragrance of blossoms around them, enveloping them in tranquility. After years of emptiness, the mansion finally resonated with warmth, becoming a true home for both Samuel and Sarah. In the stillness of that moment, enveloped by the garden that Rachel had cherished, their fresh start began to flourish. It was a time for everyone to share and connect. At last, prepare yourself for the remarkable tales that are about to unfold. We are dedicated to delivering the finest choices, rich in meaning while still captivating. Looking forward to your presence.